The champagne glasses froze midair. The perfectly manicured hands stopped arranging pastel ribbons. Every head at that exclusive baby shower turned toward the sound, the deep, unmistakable roar of a private jet touching down on the nearby airstrip. "Wait, isn't that Suzanne Thompson?" "Donald's paralyzed ex-wife," someone whispered. "How did she even get here?" Another voice, sharper, and, "Oh my God, are those 4 babies?" The whispers turned to gasps as a sleek black car pulled up to the garden entrance, and there I was, Suzanne Thompson, the woman they all thought had been buried by tragedy 3 years ago, arriving with an entourage that included a handsome man in an impeccable suit and 4 beautiful children who looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine spread. You know, sometimes the person who abandons you in your darkest hour becomes the very reason you discover just how powerful you really are. Sometimes being left for dead is exactly what you need to be reborn. My name is Suzanne Thompson, and this is the story of how I went from being the woman Donald Purpura saw as damaged, disposable, and utterly destroyed, a liability he discarded while I was still in a hospital bed, to the woman who landed her private jet at his fiancée's baby shower, stood up on her own 2 feet for the first time in public in 3 years, and showed him what true power, true wealth, and true motherhood really look like. But let me start from the beginning, because every triumph needs context, and every phoenix needs to burn first. I was 28 when the accident happened. I was Mrs. Donald Purpura, living in a penthouse that overlooked the city, wearing designer clothes that cost more than most people's cars, attending galas where champagne flowed like water and everyone smiled with teeth as white and cold as ice. I thought I had everything. I thought being married to a billionaire meant I was untouchable, protected, secure. But the crash, that devastating, life-shattering moment when my car went off the road and my spine took the impact, revealed a truth I'd been too naive to see. I had nothing. Nothing but a husband who saw me as a trophy that had gotten scratched, a product that had malfunctioned, an investment that had failed to deliver returns. The doctors told me I might never walk again. Donald told me I was no longer suitable to be his wife. The accident happened on a Tuesday. Isn't it strange how your entire life can shatter on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon? I was driving back from yet another fertility specialist appointment, this one in Westchester, because Donald had heard they had a 73% success rate, and Donald always demanded the highest percentages. The roads were slick from an earlier rain. I remember thinking about the doctor's words, about how there was still nothing wrong with me, about how maybe the problem wasn't medical at all but something deeper, something broken in the foundation of my marriage. I don't remember the truck running the red light. I don't remember the impact, the sound of metal crushing, the way my car spun and flipped and finally wrapped itself around a concrete barrier. The doctors told me later that I was lucky to be alive. Lucky. That was the word they used as they explained that my spine had been severely damaged, that there was significant trauma to my lower vertebrae, that I might never walk again. I woke up 3 days later in a private hospital room that Donald had paid for, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed and monitored every struggling function of my broken body. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. When I tried to move them, nothing happened. It was like sending a command into a void and getting only silence in return. Donald came to see me that first day. He stood at the foot of my bed, still wearing his suit from whatever meeting he'd left to be there, and for a moment, just a brief, flickering moment, I saw something like concern in his eyes. "The doctors say you're going to survive," he said, as if that was the end of the conversation. Not, "I'm glad you're alive," or "I was terrified I'd lost you." Just a statement of fact, a confirmation of data. "Donald, I can't feel my legs," I whispered, my voice hoarse from the intubation tube they'd only recently removed. He nodded, checked his watch. "They explained the spinal injury. We'll get you the best care. The best therapists." He pulled out his phone, already typing. "I'll have Natasha coordinate everything." That was his only visit for the first week. Oh, he sent flowers. Enormous arrangements that filled the room with the cloying scent of lilies and roses. He sent fruit baskets that the nurses eventually gave away because I couldn't eat solid food yet. He ensured I had the most expensive private room, the most renowned surgeons consulting on my case. But he didn't come back. When I finally asked the nurse about it, she gave me this pitying look that I'd come to know too well. "Mrs. Purpura, your husband called. He said he's managing a significant business crisis and will visit when he can." A business crisis. Later, I'd learned through a sympathetic nurse who showed me her phone that Donald had been photographed at 3 different high-profile events that week. A charity auction. A gallery opening. A private dinner with investors. At each one, Natasha was by his side, her hand resting on his arm, her smile bright and confident. The business crisis wasn't about markets or deals. The business crisis was me. A paralyzed wife didn't fit the image of Donald Purpura, self-made billionaire, master of his universe, man who controlled everything he touched. I had become a liability, a PR problem to be managed from a distance while he recalculated his strategy. I just didn't know yet that his strategy involved erasing me completely. Donald finally came back 2 weeks after the accident. I'd been moved out of intensive care into a rehabilitation wing, though calling it rehabilitation felt optimistic given that I still couldn't move anything below my waist. I was sitting up in bed, well, propped up by pillows and mechanical adjustments, when he walked in carrying a leather portfolio instead of flowers. He didn't kiss me. Didn't ask how I was feeling. He pulled up a chair, set the portfolio on the rolling tray table beside my bed, and looked at me with the same expression he wore when reviewing quarterly reports that disappointed him. "Suzanne, we need to talk about our situation," he said, and something cold slithered down my spine, the only sensation I seemed capable of feeling there anymore. "Our situation?" I repeated. "You mean my recovery?" "The doctor said with intensive therapy, there's a chance." "I'm not talking about your recovery." He opened the portfolio, pulled out a stack of papers. "I'm talking about our marriage." The room suddenly felt too small, too bright, too real. "What?" "I've consulted with my attorneys. Given your medical condition and the prognosis, it's clear that you're no longer able to fulfill the obligations of being my wife." He said it so matter-of-factly, like he was explaining why he decided to sell off an underperforming asset. "You can't give me an heir, Suzanne. You can't even stand beside me at events. You can't perform any of the functions that..." "Functions?" The word came out as a gasp. "Donald, I'm your wife. I was nearly killed. I'm fighting to walk again, and you're talking about functions?" He had the audacity to look annoyed, like my emotional response was an inconvenience. "Don't be dramatic. I'm being practical. You're paralyzed. That's not going to change, regardless of what hopeful doctors tell you. I need a partner who can operate at my level, who can give me children, who can be an asset to my public image. You're none of those things anymore." The papers landed on my lap with a soft thud. Divorce papers. I could see the words through my blurring vision. Petition for dissolution of marriage. "You're divorcing me while I'm in a hospital bed?" My voice broke. "While I'm paralyzed?" "I'm divorcing you because you're paralyzed." He stood, straightened his tie. "My lawyers have structured a settlement. It's fair, covers your medical expenses for the next year, a modest sum for living expenses. More than generous considering the circumstances." "Generous?" I stared at him, this man I'd loved, this man I'd rebuilt my entire life around. "We've been married for 5 years. You're worth $3 billion. And you're offering me," I looked at the number on the settlement page, $250,000? For a paralyzed woman with no prospects, no career, and significant medical needs, it's quite reasonable. He picked up his portfolio. "Sign the papers, Suzanne. My attorney will be by tomorrow to collect them. I prefer to keep this quiet and efficient. You're a liability now," he added, pausing at the door. "I built my empire by knowing when to cut losses. This is just business. Just business. 5 years of marriage, reduced to a line item on a balance sheet. A liability to be eliminated." The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. The Horizon Recovery Center in upstate New York was where Donald's lawyers sent me after I signed the papers. I didn't have much choice. My parents were gone, I had no siblings, and the friends I'd accumulated during my marriage to Donald had evaporated the moment news of the divorce leaked. Funny how people who smiled at you over champagne suddenly don't know your number when you're no longer useful. The center was beautiful in that intentional, therapeutic way, lots of natural light, gardens visible from every window, staff who smiled like they actually meant it. It was also the place where I met Dr. Alex Thorne, and where I started building something that would eventually destroy Donald's entire sense of superiority. Alex wasn't what I expected from a physical therapist. He was young, maybe 32, with warm brown eyes and an easy smile that reached all the way to those eyes. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hands that were strong but incredibly gentle when he first assessed my range of motion. More importantly, he talked to me like I was a person, not a tragedy. "The spine is remarkable," he said during our first session, his hands carefully manipulating my unresponsive leg. "People think of it as fixed, permanent. But there's so much we're still learning about neural pathways, about the brain's ability to reroute signals. I'm not going to lie to you, Suzanne, your injury is severe. But severe doesn't mean impossible. Impossible. That's exactly what Donald had called my future. But lying in that therapy room, feeling Alex's genuine investment in my recovery, something shifted. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was spite. Maybe it was just the stubborn part of me that had worked 2 jobs to get through college refusing to accept that this was my ending. I started researching during my sleepless nights between therapy sessions. The accessibility technology market was fragmented, outdated, ridiculously overpriced. Wheelchairs that cost more than cars but looked like medical equipment from the 1980s. Apps that were supposed to help people navigate the world but were clunky and poorly designed. A whole industry that treated disabled people like an afterthought, a niche market not worth innovating for. I knew technology. That's what I'd studied in business school, what I'd been working on before Donald decided I'd be more valuable as a trophy than as an analyst. I knew design. I'd spent 5 years watching how the wealthy demanded beauty and functionality in everything they touched. And now I knew personally, intimately, what it felt like to navigate a world that wasn't built for you. What if accessibility technology was beautiful? I asked Alex one day during a break between exercises. What if it was something people wanted to use, not something they had to use? He looked at me with genuine interest. "You thinking about starting a business?" "I'm thinking about starting a revolution." I took Donald's insulting settlement, $250,000 that was supposed to make me disappear quietly, and found 3 brilliant engineers who'd been laid off from major tech companies. I hired a designer who understood that disability didn't mean sacrificing aesthetics. I called in every favor from my old consulting days, reached out to former colleagues who remembered me as smart, capable, driven. Ascend Global was born in a hospital room, funded by spite and pocket change. Within 6 months, we had our first prototype, a wheelchair that looked like it belonged in a Tesla showroom, controlled by an app that actually worked. Within a year, we had venture capital interest. Within 18 months, we had our first major contracts with hospitals and rehab centers across the country. Donald thought he'd left me with nothing. He'd actually given me the greatest motivation I'd ever had. The feeling came back in small, electric whispers. A tingle in my left foot during a therapy session. A muscle twitch in my right calf that made Alex's eyes light up like I'd just won the lottery. 6 months after the accident, 9 months after Donald had called me a liability, my body started remembering how to communicate with itself. "Don't get too excited," Alex cautioned, but his smile betrayed him. "Partial recovery doesn't mean full recovery. We're talking about maybe regaining some mobility, some sensation. You need to be realistic about." "I'm always realistic," I said, and I was. Realistic enough to know that what I was feeling, these tiny sparks of sensation returning to my legs, was information that needed to be protected like a trade secret. I didn't tell anyone beyond Alex and my core medical team. I certainly didn't tell the press, who occasionally still ran stories about Donald Purpura's paralyzed ex-wife. I didn't tell the investors who were starting to circle Ascend Global with serious interest. And I absolutely didn't tell Donald, who I knew through mutual acquaintances was now openly dating Natasha, bringing her to events, introducing her as his partner in every sense. Let them all think I was broken. Let them all underestimate me from my wheelchair. Because while they were underestimating, I was building an empire. Ascend Global's first major breakthrough came 14 months after I founded it. We developed a smart prosthetic system that used AI to predict user movement, making artificial limbs feel almost natural. The technology was revolutionary. More importantly, the design was beautiful, sleek, customizable, something people were proud to wear rather than ashamed to need. The orders started flooding in. First from individuals, then from hospitals, then from governments looking to modernize their healthcare systems. We went from a scrappy startup working out of a converted warehouse to a company with international contracts worth hundreds of millions. I ran every board meeting from my wheelchair. I took every investor call sitting down, my useless-looking legs hidden beneath expensive blankets. I let them see what they expected to see, a woman who'd been dealt a tragic hand, making the best of terrible circumstances. They called me inspiring. They called me brave. They never called me what I actually was, strategic. By the second year, Ascend Global had expanded into adaptive technologies for homes and vehicles. Smart systems that made everyday life accessible without looking medical or institutional. We partnered with luxury car companies, high-end real estate developers, premium furniture designers. We made accessibility aspirational. The money came in waves that turned into tsunamis. Our Series C funding round valued us at $800 million. Our partnership with a major tech giant pushed us past $2 billion. By the time I'd been divorced from Donald for 2.5 years, my personal net worth had surpassed his. I kept that information very, very quiet. I also kept quiet about the fact that I could now stand, with assistance. That I could take halting steps between parallel bars in Alex's private therapy room. That my body was slowly, painfully, miraculously rebuilding the connections Donald had assumed were permanently severed. Every night, after board meetings and strategy sessions and investor calls, I practiced. I pushed myself through exercises that left me sweating and crying and sometimes screaming in frustration. Alex was there for all of it, encouraging, adjusting, believing in possibilities that medical textbooks said were unlikely. "Why are you pushing so hard?" he asked one night, after I'd managed to walk 15 feet unassisted, my legs shaking with effort. I looked at him, thought about Donald's face when he'd called me a liability, thought about Natasha's hand on his arm at that gallery opening. "Because I'm preparing for war," I said. "And in war, the best weapon is the one your enemy doesn't know you have." It happened so gradually I didn't even notice I was falling in love until I'd already fallen. Alex had become more than my physical therapist. He was my confidant, my cheerleader, the person who saw me at my absolute worst and never once looked at me with pity. He saw me crying in frustration when my legs wouldn't cooperate. He saw me screaming in pain during particularly brutal therapy sessions. He saw me vulnerable and broken and fighting, and somehow, he looked at me like I was the strongest person he'd ever met. "You know what I love about you," he said one evening after a session where I'd managed to walk 20 feet unassisted. We were sitting in his office, both exhausted, my legs aching in that good way that meant they were working. "My sparkling personality?" I joked, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Your refusal to accept anyone else's definition of what's possible." He handed me a water bottle, and our fingers touched. It wasn't the first time we'd touched. He'd been touching me professionally for nearly 2 years, but this felt different. Charged. "You're extraordinary, Suzanne." I looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd spent countless hours helping me rebuild not just my body but my sense of self. This man who celebrated my business victories like they were his own and never once treated my wheelchair as anything other than a temporary transportation method. "Alex," I said softly, "is this wildly inappropriate? You're technically still my therapist." He smiled. "I stopped being just your therapist about 6 months ago. I became your friend. And now I'm trying to figure out if I can be something more." Something more. With Donald, I'd been an acquisition, an asset, a means to an end. With Alex, I was just Suzanne. Brilliant, driven, complicated, damaged, healing Suzanne. Our first kiss happened in that therapy room, surrounded by parallel bars and exercise mats and equipment designed to help broken people become whole again. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. 6 months later, living together in a penthouse I'd bought with Ascend Global money, this one mine, earned, untainted by Donald's empire, we started talking about the future. Real future, not the performative future I'd had with Donald where children were heirs and marriage was a business arrangement. "I want a family," I told Alex one night, curled up against him on the couch. "And I know it's complicated. My injury, the fertility questions, all of it. But nothing," he interrupted. "We'll figure it out. That's what we do, right? We figure out how to make impossible things possible." We found a fertility specialist who didn't look at my medical history like it was a death sentence. Dr. Reeves was a small woman with an enormous reputation, and she studied my charts with the kind of intensity one recognized, the intensity of someone who saw challenges as puzzles to solve. Your reproductive system is fine, she confirmed after a battery of tests. The spinal injury doesn't affect ovarian function. With the right protocols, there's no medical reason you can't carry a pregnancy. Donald's voice echoed in my memory, you can't give me an heir. He'd been so certain, so dismissive, never bothering to confirm his assumptions with actual medical science. Let's do it, I told Alex and Dr. Reeves. Let's build our family. The treatments were intensive. Hormone injections that made me emotional and exhausted. Careful monitoring. Strategic timing. But through all of it, Alex was there, holding my hand, making me laugh, reminding me that this wasn't about proving anything to anyone except ourselves. When Dr. Reeves called with the results, her voice was barely containing excitement. Suzanne, you're pregnant. And based on the hormone levels, I think we need to schedule an early ultrasound. 4 heartbeats. 4 tiny, perfect heartbeats on that screen. Quadruplets. The pregnancy was both a miracle and a masterclass in strategic deception. Dr. Reeves warned me that carrying quadruplets was high risk under normal circumstances, exponentially more so given my medical history. But I'd spent the last 3 years defying medical expectations, and I wasn't about to stop now. I kept the pregnancy completely private. No announcements, no social media posts, no leaked photos to gossip columns. As far as the world knew, I was still the paralyzed ex-wife of Donald Purpura, running my accessibility tech company from a wheelchair, occasionally appearing at industry conferences to give inspiring talks about resilience. What they didn't know was that by my second trimester, I was walking. Really walking. Not just the assisted, halting steps I'd managed before, but actual, functional, independent walking. My body had continued its miraculous recovery, and the pregnancy hormones seemed to accelerate the healing in ways that fascinated my medical team. This is unprecedented, Dr. Reeves said during one of my checkups, watching me walk across her examination room without assistance. Your neural pathways have essentially rewired themselves. Combined with the therapy and your own determination, you've achieved what most medical textbooks would call impossible. Can we keep calling it impossible? I asked. At least publicly? She understood immediately. The wheelchair stays? The wheelchair stays. For now. Alex worried about me during those months. The pregnancy was exhausting, carrying 4 babies will do that, and I was still running a multi-billion-dollar company while managing my recovery in secret. But every ultrasound, every moment I felt those 4 little lives moving inside me, reminded me why I was doing this. Donald had said I was unsuitable. That I couldn't give him an heir. That I was a liability. I was about to give birth to 4 perfect children and simultaneously close a deal that would make Ascend Global the most valuable accessibility technology company in the world. The babies came at 34 weeks, which Dr. Reeves assured me was excellent for quadruplets. 3 girls and 1 boy, all healthy, all perfect. Emma, Olivia, Sophie, and James. I held them in the private wing of the hospital, Alex beside me, tears streaming down both our faces. You did it, he whispered, kissing my forehead. You're amazing. We did it, I corrected. Because unlike my marriage to Donald, this was actually a partnership. We kept the births quiet too. Private records, sealed documents, NDAs with hospital staff. As far as the public knew, I was simply taking a medical leave from Ascend Global for a few months. My executives ran things smoothly in my absence. I'd built a strong team, unlike Donald who needed to micromanage everything because he trusted no one. By the time the babies were 3 months old, I was back at work, still appearing publicly in my wheelchair. It had become more than a mobility device. It was a symbol, a statement, and most importantly, a strategic advantage. People underestimated you when they thought you were limited. They didn't see you coming. I'd been walking independently for over a year. I could stand, run, climb stairs. My recovery was complete in every medical sense. But the world still saw me as paralyzed Suzanne Thompson, the tragic figure who'd been abandoned by billionaire Donald Purpura. Let them keep believing that. Because in 3 months, I was going to stand up at the most public moment imaginable and show them exactly who I'd become. The call came on a Thursday afternoon while I was in a board meeting, finalizing the details of Ascend Global's upcoming IPO. My assistant interrupted, something she never did unless it was critical, and mouthed Donald Purpura with wide eyes. I hadn't spoken to Donald in 3 years. Not since the divorce papers were signed, not since he'd called me a liability and walked out of that hospital room. I excused myself from the meeting and took the call in my private office, my heart pounding with something between curiosity and rage. Suzanne, his voice came through, smooth and confident as ever. It's been too long. Has it? I kept my voice neutral, professional. What can I do for you, Donald? I'm calling with an invitation, actually. Natasha and I are expecting a boy, due in 3 months, and we're having a baby shower next weekend. Very exclusive, very elegant affair. I thought you might like to attend. I let the silence stretch, processing. Donald Purpura, the man who divorced me for being unable to give him children, was calling to invite me to celebrate the child he was having with his former assistant. The audacity was almost impressive. Why would you want me there? I asked carefully. He laughed, that condescending chuckle I remembered too well. Come now, Suzanne. We're adults. The past is the past. I've moved on, clearly. I've heard you're doing well with that little accessibility company of yours. Quite inspiring, really, how you've made something of your situation. Little accessibility company. Ascend Global was valued at over $4 billion, but I let it slide. Besides, he continued, and I could hear the smile in his voice, the calculated pleasure of a man who thought he was being magnanimous, I think it would be good for you. Show people you've moved on too. That there are no hard feelings. You know how the society pages love a good reconciliation story. And honestly, Suzanne, seeing you there, it would be a testament to both our characters. Me for being gracious enough to extend the olive branch, and you for being strong enough to accept it. And there it was. The real reason. Donald wanted me at his baby shower in my wheelchair, the tragic ex-wife who'd been replaced by a younger, fertile, fully functional model. I'd be his proof of concept, his living testament to the rightness of his decision. Look how far he'd come from the damaged goods he'd had to discard. Look how wise he'd been to cut his losses. It would mean a lot to Natasha, he added, playing his final card. She's always felt terrible about how things ended between us. She'd love to show you there are no hard feelings. I'm sure she would, I thought. Nothing says, no hard feelings, like flaunting your pregnancy to the woman your husband divorced for being unable to conceive. That's very generous of you both, I said, my mind already calculating angles, outcomes, the perfect moment for maximum impact. I'd be delighted to attend. Excellent. The satisfaction in his voice was palpable. I'll have Natasha send you the details. It's at our estate in the Hamptons. We've transformed the grounds, imported roses, a live orchestra, Michelin-starred catering. Spare no expense, you know how it is. Or, well, how it was for you. That little dig. He couldn't help himself. I'm sure it's lovely, I said smoothly. I'll see you next weekend, Donald. I hung up and sat in my office, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. 3 years ago, I'd been broken in a hospital bed while Donald walked away. Now he was inviting me to his baby shower, thinking I'd roll and looking pitiful and defeated, a cautionary tale to make him look better by comparison. He had no idea what was coming. I picked up my phone and called Alex. Remember how we talked about going public with everything? I think I just found the perfect venue. The private jet touched down at the exclusive airstrip near the Hamptons estate at exactly 2 in the afternoon. I'd timed it perfectly, late enough that most guests would already be there, early enough to make an entrance. Through the window, I could see the baby shower in full swing on the estate grounds, pastel balloons floating above tables draped in silk, champagne glasses glittering in the sunlight. Ready? Alex asked, adjusting James in his arms while the nanny helped the girls into their matching designer dresses. I've been ready for 3 years, I said, settling into my wheelchair one last time. The sleek black car pulled up to the garden entrance, and I could feel the moment the guests noticed. The conversations faltered. Heads turned. Someone gasped. I rolled forward, Alex walking beside me pushing a custom stroller that held 4 beautiful, healthy children, and the whispers started like wildfire. Is that Suzanne Thompson? I thought she was paralyzed. Wait, are those babies? How many are there? Oh my God, Donald's going to lose his mind. Donald appeared first, his face cycling through confusion, shock, and something that might have been fear before settling on forced charm. Suzanne. You made it. And you brought guests? My family, I said simply. My partner, Dr. Alex Thorne, and our children. Emma, Olivia, Sophie, and James. Quadruplets. They're 8 months old now. I watched the color drain from his face as he did the math. 8 months old. Which meant I'd gotten pregnant roughly 6 months after our divorce. Which meant everything he'd said about me being unable to have children had been catastrophically wrong. Natasha materialized beside him, her hand protectively over her pregnant belly, her smile sharp as glass. How wonderful that you could join us, Suzanne. And what beautiful children. It must have been quite the surprise, given your medical situation. She was good. I'd give her that. The implication was clear, that my pregnancy was somehow desperate, unexpected, perhaps even questionable given my paralysis. Shall we have some champagne? Natasha continued, gesturing toward the tables. Oh, wait, you probably can't navigate the grass in your chair. Let me have someone bring you a glass. The guests were watching now, this carefully choreographed moment of Natasha's superiority playing out exactly as they'd planned. The fertile, capable new wife showing kindness to the broken, discarded ex-wife. Actually, I said, I think it's time for a toast. I rolled toward the microphone set up near the main table, Alex following with our children. Natasha's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered, probably thinking I was about to give some gracious, defeated speech about moving on. I reached the microphone and took it from the stand. The garden fell silent. Thank you all for allowing me to share this moment, I began. 3 years ago, Donald told me I was a liability. That I couldn't give him an heir. That a paralyzed wife wasn't suitable for a man of his ambition. I paused, letting that sink in. He was right about one thing, I couldn't give him an heir. But not for the reasons he thought. I stood up. The gasps were audible, rippling through the crowd like a wave. Donald's face went white. Natasha actually stumbled backward. Surprise, I said, taking a few steps forward on legs that worked perfectly. I've been walking for 2 years. Fully recovered. I just chose not to share that information publicly. Strategic advantage, you might say. I gestured to Alex and our children. These are my quadruplets. 3 girls and a boy. Healthy, perfect, everything Donald claimed I could never have. Turns out the problem was never medical, it was circumstantial. Wrong partner, wrong priorities, wrong everything. Donald tried to speak, but no sound came out. I also want to announce something else, I continued, my voice carrying across the stunned garden. Ascend Global, my little accessibility company, completed its IPO last week. Current market valuation, $6.2 billion. For context, Donald, your entire real estate empire is valued at roughly $3 billion. So not only did I recover, not only did I have the children you said I couldn't, I also built something worth twice what you've spent your entire life building. And I did it in 3 years. The silence was deafening. So thank you, I said, looking directly at Donald, for the invitation. For reminding me why I fought so hard. For proving that being called a liability by the wrong person is actually the greatest gift they can give you. I handed the microphone back, walked to Alex, and kissed him in front of everyone. Then we gathered our children and headed back to the car, to the jet, to the life we'd built from the ashes of Donald's cruelty. Behind us, I heard Natasha's voice, shrill and panicked, Donald, say something. But what could he say? He'd bet everything on me staying broken, and instead, I'd become unstoppable. Before you go, if you enjoyed Suzanne's incredible journey from devastation to triumph, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories of people who refuse to stay down when life knocked them flat. Drop a comment below telling me what you would have said to Donald if you were in Suzanne's position. I read every single one and love hearing your thoughts. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story today, someone who's going through their own battle and needs a reminder that comeback is always possible, share this video with them. Your support means everything and helps these stories reach people who need them most. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next story.